Hello, my name is Lizette Correas, and this summer I worked in the paleobiology department with Matthew Miller. Science is my explanation to life. I was curious about everything and anything, such as why my hair is curly, what makes it black, and what makes my heart beat. My questions were indefinite. I would say science resolved my curiosity, but in reality, science made my curious mindset expand. When I was younger, I remember wanting to go to back to school night with my parents, but my parents were hesitant on going because they were scared because they wouldn't understand what the teachers were going to be saying. I come from a family whose first language isn't English, and so they were not in the comfortable level to be adapting to change. And so I persuaded my parents with my puppy eyes and a promise to do chores for a month. And so when we arrived at back to school night, they were already scared and they regretted their decision. I saw it in their eyes. But I had to drag them along. I wanted them to see my cool projects and my cool teachers and what I would be doing every day in school. And so already off the bat, while the teachers were talking, my parents were confused because they were talking in English, but something that occurred, I didn't realize that at the time, but I became a bridge. I became a bridge to the language barrier between my teachers and my parents. So I translated for my parents, and throughout the night, I continued to translate for them. And so then we bonded through that experience, and also they became more adapted to change, and they were learning English little by little, but they were still learning, and that's something that I feel proud of them. And 10 years later, I ended up translating again, but not for my family. This summer, I had a chance to participate in Community Day, where I showed off what I did during the summer with my mentor, Matthew Miller, and I presented about cetaceans, porpoises, and dolphins. And cetaceans is a fancy word for whales. And so I presented about the process of digitizing fossils in order for them to be uploaded into the Smithsonian website so researchers and also the public can view all the fossils that we have stored under the museum, which not everyone has a chance to look at because our collection is so massive, so we can't always put them on display. So we use the website as a way to open our doors up. And so during Community Day, an Hispanic family walked in, and I was placed up front, so I was by the door, and I saw whoever came in or whoever came out. And so when I saw them, the kids wanted to rush in, they wanted to go to every station, and they were just being kids. They wanted to explore, they were curious. And so, but the parents were confused. They didn't want to go in. They were holding the kids back. They were about to turn around and just leave and just, I guess, view the whole museum, or they just wanted to exit the museum and all. But I didn't want them to be a barrier between the kids and the curiosity that they wanted to view the stations or whatnot. So I introduced the parents. I told them to come to my station, but I said it in Spanish. The reason why I did that was because when I saw the parents, it reminded me of how my parents looked when they took me back to school night. And so they were uncomfortable. That's why they didn't want the kids to go in. Because what if they went to a station and they would not know what they were doing? They didn't know what was being told. They didn't know what was being presented, basically. And so when I introduced them, I told them, bienvenidos a Curious. Hoy tenemos varios niños que están presentando para de que hicieron en la programa. And so, which was welcome to Curious. There's a lot of kids that are presenting their presentations of what they did during the summer. And so when they came over, I saw the kids, they just ran over because they finally got a chance to go to a station. And so when they came, I asked the parents, I asked them where were they from. I wanted to become familiar with the parents so I would know what I should do when I present. Should I be advanced and use certain vocabulary, or should I move it down a bit for them to like comprehend me. And so the family just came from Colombia. They were just doing a vacation, and they told me that if they could like have a special thing. And I was like, what do you mean special thing? And they were like, can you present Spanish? And I was like, that's fine. And so then the kids wanted in English, which was hilarious, but the parents wanted in Spanish. So I used Spanglish, so it was like alternate. And so throughout the presentation, I would use Spanish to connect with the parents, and also English so the kids could connect. The kids didn't know Spanish as much as well as the parents, and so the parents didn't know as much English as the kids. So it was like a dilemma, but it was a good experience because I opened up their doors for them not to be uncomfortable, for them to like explore, and not to be afraid, not to use that language barrier as something that's going to hold them back forever. And so then I pointed out other Spanish-speaking presenters that were in the room, and so the kids went fast. But the funny thing was that the parents actually went faster towards other presenters, and so after they learned that they were like Spanish-speaking presenters, um, they became as curious as the kids, and so that was like a eye-opening moment because like now I helped them break down their barrier.
Cultural anthropology. What is cultural anthropology? Cultural anthropology is the study of what humans do, whether it be in their diverse societies or the many cultures that exist. This summer, to me, was a life-changing experience. I got to learn about what anthropology was, what it consisted of, and how it affected my life on a personal level. I got to be a part of the YES internship program at the museum, which is Youth Engagement Through Science, and my mentor was Josh Bell, an anthropologist at the museum. Because of his job, I got to participate in this amazing opportunity where I got to help with a canoe that was being gifted to the museum from New Zealand. I got to lash the canoe, I got to be a part of and see of the carving that was being done and the painting, and I felt that bridging this gap between cultures really affected me because of the changing world we live in. Besides that, I began to talk about and learn about cell phones. I know that when I say this, you guys are going to be surprised, but I got to explode an iPhone. I know tech people, I'm sorry, but exploding this cell phone allowed me to learn about what I have in my pockets. You see, in my pockets, and I'm pretty sure that in your pockets too, if you pull out your cell phones, you have over 73 elements in the palm of your hand. 73 elements which might not even be in your home. I got to learn about the effects that these people mining these elements, because everything comes from the earth, of course, the effects that these elements have, whether it be health issues or even something related to their families, because you never know the circumstances that these people have. They work in factories, they work in mines, and they might be affected negatively by the things that we have. I feel that if we begin to take this into consideration, we begin to understand and see the effects of what we have, benefits us, but might be harmful for other people. I feel that anthropology opened the door for me to see something new, to be able to feel something close to the things that I own. You see, not many people know about anthropology, specifically cultural anthropology. You see, it sits between physical and life sciences. There's chemistry, biology on one hand, and on the other, there's sociology and things like psychology, of course, dealing with the mind. And if you take into consideration what anthropology is, you begin to see that it encompasses so many other things than you can think about. There's culture, linguistics, forensics, and all those types of things, which we might not think about. I myself wasn't that knowledgeful of what anthropology was, but this summer changed this for me. I got to be a part of this amazing program, which the Smithsonian let me be a part of. And I feel that if you guys take your own journeys, if you guys look for opportunities just like I did, I know that I'm a teenager talking to you guys about anthropology. You guys can do the same thing. So I encourage you guys, take your journey and you will see that it was worth it in the long run. Thank you.
This summer, I was able to make an impact in the world. I was able to teach a child how to pipette. Now you may be asking yourselves, What is a pipette, and why is teaching a child how to pipette so important? Well, a pipette is this obscure lab instrument that we use to transfer minute amounts of liquid from one place to another. And it's important because, sure, we can pour different liquids from beaker to beaker, but when we're working with really small amounts of liquid, it can become quite difficult. This summer, while doing research on the mislabeling fish crisis in Central and South America, I used pipetting every day. Pipetting basically became my life. Just from moving small amounts of DNA from this place to another, I began to perfect my pipetting skills. And the day that my big exposition day came, I wasn't sure if I was ready. It'd just been 6 weeks and I just learned these skills, so they were fresh in my mind. As the day neared, I reassured myself that I was able to do it, and the community day started. So while I was talking to visitors, I had hundreds of visitors come to my table, and they were in a hurry. They weren't really trying to listen to everything that I was saying, and that's understandable because they were like dinosaurs and spiders at other tables. But this one kid, Jackson, he was different from all the rest. He came to my table and he came wide-eyed and eager to learn. He exploded with a plethora of questions about, what is that? Like, what are you holding? How can I be like you? And that was super crazy. I wasn't expecting a small 6-year-old kid to come at me like that. But he was able to listen to everything I had to say, and he learned very fast. He stayed at my table for over an hour until the end of community day, and from that experience, I learned that I can inspire others. So in the beginning, I said that everyone wants to make an impact in the world, but nobody really knows how. And I'm here to say that you can make an impact in the world by the small things that you do. So I came into it not knowing who I would see, who I would meet, but I was able to meet Jackson, and from that experience, he was able to tell me that he wanted to be a scientist because I taught him. So I urge you guys to go out and pursue your passions, do big things, and through that, you can inspire others. Thank you.
It was Community Day, a day when all the high school interns who had spent the summer working at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History presented their research to anyone who would be willing to hear it. It was also the last day of a long 6-week internship, so to be honest, I was exhausted. As I stood by my table, I didn't really know what I was expecting to happen. After a few hours of only a couple visitors walking by my table, I was approached by a 13-year-old girl. Once again, I wasn't expecting to gain much from this interaction, but this one girl proved me wrong. As I started to give my introduction speech, I realized that I had said it probably a couple dozen times. As I continued the talk, the girl who stood in front of me with brown hair and eager eyes asked me a question. I paused for a second because every time I had given that speech, everyone would simply nod their heads. However, this girl was different. I answered her question, and after that, she had about 10 more. And this is when I started to feel truly engaged. This summer, I interned at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. in the vertebrate zoology department. My research mentor had developed an interest in South American fisheries, so that was the focus of our research. The issue at hand was the mislabeling of fish in the Caribbean. Due to the lack of abundance of traditionally caught fish species, substitute species were being introduced into the fish market. Many of these fish were being sold in restaurants to tourists who were unaware of what they were truly eating. This issue poses a number of other ones, such as overfishing and the decline of the conservation statuses of these fish. This issue really interested me, and I decided that in order to expose these malpractices, I had to conduct DNA barcoding. DNA barcoding is a scientific method used to identify different species. I used it specifically for fish, which I was really interested in, but it can be used for a variety of different species of animals. And basically what is done is it goes through DNA goes through a series of steps, which it's first extracted and then it is then sequenced. Going into this experience, I realized that I was surrounded by a lot of scientists who had spent many years in college learning and studying different techniques of conducting lab work. And here I was, a 17-year-old girl, simply trying to successfully attempt the basics of lab work. As I started throughout the internship, I realized that things were going to be a lot more difficult than I had imagined. However, with the help of my research mentor, I was able to successfully collect data from this research experiment. After conducting DNA barcoding a few times, I was left with research that with results that would prove to be really interesting. I discovered that 52% of the 29 samples from Guatemala that I researched and a whopping 77% of the 35 samples from Honduras were fish that had been mislabeled. In both of these countries, the amount of mislabeled fish constitutes the majority, which proves the severity of the issue. I also discovered that the two most commonly substituted species were catfish and groupers. Catfish are generally from aquaculture, which could pose environmental problems where farming occurs. And catfish are endangered, which means if they continue to be overfished, their conservation status could decline severely. So after conducting this extensive research, I was left with the question of how do I make other people care about this? Being in a lab every day from 9 to 4 p.m. can almost change your perception of reality. Instead of human interaction, I was getting a lot of time with gels, PCR machines, and my lab coat. I was beginning to forget about why this project was truly important to me, and that made me feel a bigger desire to make other people care. So it was community day and I was nervous. I was nervous that kids would pass right by my table, and I was nervous that people wouldn't understand why the mislabeling of fish was an important issue. It wasn't until that one 13-year-old girl approached me that I realized that other people do care about the environment and about what I specifically have to say. This interaction urges me to encourage other scientists and all of you to not only strive to learn new pieces of information, but to find ways to make other people care and to influence other lives with the information that you know yourself. That day, I didn't just teach a 13-year-old girl about DNA barcoding, but she taught me about the significance of learning, which will have a lasting impact on my life.
So let me paint you a picture. On the first day of my internship, I walked down this dark and dusty staircase that led me from one office to another. The offices of so many noble scientists followed me throughout this walk, but unfortunately, they were just adults to me. Walls which surrounded me were filled with science posters that were meant to be funny, they just seemed weird. As I went past this picture on a daily basis, I would end up at the same place. Time after time, I would end up at my office. So then I thought, this is where I'll be spending my summer at? The room was an old room that seemed to be at least 20 years old. As I walked to my left, as I entered the room, I would see this rusty sink that had green water stains at the bottom of it. In the corner was this beaten up chair that sat on top of this random table looking so ever dull. In the other corner were these random lights that just laid there because they seemed to have no purpose. And the old carpet that laid on the ground seemed need to be washed at least 10 times to regain some of its color. So my first thoughts as I entered this room on a daily basis was a question rather than a statement. The question was, why am I sitting here? So when I found out what I'd be doing on a daily basis, it was unexpected. The routine consisted of me looking at a spreadsheet full of serial numbers and unknown scientific names to a normal being. I would scan the list and pick a random one, and I would find its current home on the dusty shelf that surrounded me. I would take it from here to there, to my office, from the shelves to my office. I would get ready for its photo shoot. I would take shots of the specimen, front and back, and critique the lighting to make the most in-depth photo that I could. The true value of these photos were never understood to me until weeks after, and I truly saw the true value of it. To explain to anyone what I simply did, it's pretty simple. I took photos of cetaceans. Cetaceans are simply whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Why such a complicated word for something that has such an extraordinary meaning? It was hectic at first, but then it became routine. The day that I was lucky, I got to take a picture of this huge sperm whale that was so huge, I had to lay on the floor while I took photos of it from higher ground. It was like nothing that I had ever worked with before. Others were just so small and simple to me. There were so many of them where there would be days where I would look at it for 1 minute and forget the next. But this sperm whale can never be forgotten. It would take up your entire memory just as it had done with my eyesight's attention. It was hard as a rock, but left impressions behind that were visible and evident. Somehow, while taking these photos, I seemed to put a story behind that face. As I saw how huge the teeth were, the size of it, I assumed and put a picture to it that it was a huge predator back in its home. And when I saw how huge the eye sockets were, I just wondered, what had those eyes seen? There was so much to be told with this story. But unfortunately, I wanted to step out of routine. I wanted to do more than take simple, unprofessional photos that held no true meaning to me yet. And so I researched and researched, not the internet, but my brain. And when I finally understood the true purpose of what I'd done this summer, I realized it had a real impact on others. A lot of times people are misinformed when it comes to the ownership of the items that we hold in the museum. Sometimes when you're looking at it straight through a glass window, you feel like it's owned by someone specifically. But in actuality, the specimen isn't held trust to the museum. The actual owners of it are the citizens of the United States of America. So, as I go through this journey on a daily basis, there was so much to think about. And before this experience, the photos and the time and work that were seen on the internet to me just seemed like something that the museum did just to show for. But after this experience, I really saw the true meaning and purpose that went to it. I found out that my work, the main purpose of my work, was to communicate these photos to the public through the past, present, and future. In the past, we were able to see what type of environment, what type of life this specimen had. In the present, there were so many people who've done so much research to understand the past. And the past and present came together so that in the future, we could continue to communicate our work to the public, to truly inform them. Sometimes you just can't judge a book by its cover. And that's something that I learned. So, to think back to those weeks and days and time that I spent in that one room, the understanding of it changed for me. Something that I saw as boring and negative turned out to be a positive for me. So, let me paint you a new picture. So now as I enter the room, I don't just see a room that's old. I see something that has a touch of wisdom to it based on its age. When I look to my left and I see that rusty sink, I see the colors changing as it does during fall, rather than green water stains. The random lights that held no purpose behind it seemed to have every single light from the year 1985. And as I continue to sit in this walk, and as I continue to think of the questions I had at the beginning of summer, why am I sitting here? I realized my main purpose was to communicate my work to others, and I'm glad that I did it. So, if anyone asked me what us interns did this summer, for me, it would be say no more, because enough has been said through a lifetime. Thank you.
Hello, my name is DeAndre Parker, and I want to tell you guys about my science experience. About 4 weeks ago, I truly realized that I enjoy science, because when sitting in this bonding class, the culture, research, and how plants can be brought to life really gave me a new insight on science. Before this class, I never really understood the deep importance of science, but now I understand that science is important to everyone. This experience has shown me that there's something deeply in my heart that I want to pursue and further study. 2 years back, science wasn't in my brain to pursue, but now I understand that science and its research is really important. Now I see that through this whole experience during the summer, that this is something that I can do for the rest of my life. I really had a great time in this botany class. This botany class showed me everything that I needed to know. This experience overall is just something that I could never wish for. This is just such a great experience. But the same steps that I took in this botany class transferred over to the Air and Space Museum, where I did work on the moon. The work that I did on the moon was to date basins, and a basin is basically a crater over 200 kilometers. The basin that I was working on was called Muscovians, and we basically wanted to find out what the youngest part of the crater was. So the overall entire project was just to see how lava was created on the moon. And the whole focal point of this whole entire project was just to know how to date surfaces on the moon. That's what I did at the Air and Space Museum, and this is something that I love for the whole summer. So once a meteorite hits the surface on the moon, a volcano starts to shoot straight up from the basin and creating the lava right there in the middle. And we wanted to find out if the highlands or the rocky area on the moon or the lava are the same age. And this way we can see this way we can date the time that the moon was made. So, or another process is that volcanism is controlled by the thickness of the crust or the upper mantle on the moon. And this can give us the answer to see if they were created at different times. So the entire project is to just learn how the moon was created back when our solar system just formed. So after doing research and counting craters on each surface, we were finally able to develop the way that the lava was created on the moon. As you can see in this graph, the blue as the highlands is so much higher and larger than the lava at the bottom in orange. So we can tell through the difference of ages that the highlands and the lava were created at totally two different times because of the age difference between them. And we can further lead to learn information about the moon but billions of years before we were even thought of as humans. So all this project and research that we have done can further lead us to know more about ourselves and know more about the world that we don't even know about in space. So, another example here is this heat sensor graph. This heat sensor graph is basically showing us the difference between the ages just in another way. So the darker colors like black mean older, and the lighter colors like white mean younger. So the lava's in the middle, and the black or the outer area is the highlands. So just through this heat sensor graph, we can basically tell which one is younger and older. And this is just another way of showing the difference between ages. It's nothing different, just simpler and more efficient. And so this is just another way for us to tell. And so this whole research and all the research I did at the Air and Space Museum and learned in this botany class has really made me respect scientists even more of how much work they do just to get to one final answer. All this research that I've done has changed my whole perspective on science and how it plays such a huge role in my life. All these things that I've done has changed me and changed the people around me. All this experience has motivated me to teach others about science and my research. Thank you.
So before I start, I'll say bluntly what I learned from my internship experience in my Smithsonian. And that is, not everything seems what it looks. Sometimes you have to look at different angles, different views to truly appreciate what it is. And in my case, me working in a museum had me realize what capabilities I have in contributing to science. Just like how the scanning electron microscope provided me with a newfound appreciation for the microscopic world. To introduce myself, my name is Justin Beck. I'm a senior, and I'm also a Smithsonian intern at the Natural History Museum working with the scanning electron microscope. So my connection with the Smithsonian began even before I went to school. I was this dinosaur, I still am, this dinosaur-obsessed kid who would go to the museum many times just on my whim. And I was just fascinated by these magnificent creatures. And that fascination drove me to being passionate about science, and that passion for science drove me to be passionate about education and school in general. Now, however, me contributing to science, me being in the science field, seemed something so far away. See, I thought it was something that only professors or experts did in their laboratories, and after years and years of training, and a high schooler like me could possibly not do it right now. So I was just content with just learning about science and keeping up with the latest science discoveries. Now, and I've never imagined that I would be able to contribute to science so early, and I would never imagine that it will be in this world-famous Smithsonian. So I was surprised when I saw a volunteer opportunity for high schoolers. I was just surfing the Smithsonian website, just being like a Smithsonian fanboy, I guess, and I was just keeping up the latest Smithsonian news, and then it popped up. And what's so special is that even before that, I tried volunteering. I sent an email to them inquiring about if there are any volunteering activities for me. And they're just like, yeah, you have to be 18 and you have to have a degree. I'm like, no, don't have that. I'm high schooler. Of course I don't have that. So it was a big letdown. So it was special. It was more special. So I applied. I got in. So it was like, yes, I got in. It's like, whoo. It was like that kind of moment. So now that's how I became a volunteer for Curious, which is the education and interactive center for the museum. And what I did there was I basically learned and touched the thousands of specimens there and conveyed my passion about them to the visitors, or unlocked their world, as the Curious motto says. So working around with those tons of fossils, birds, mammals, plants, all around me was a breathtaking experience and gave me a new perspective of what I can do and what environment I can work in. And a whole new world opened when I started applying for an internship and I was assigned a project. I had to work with the scanning electron microscope, or also known as the SEM. Now this is different from the regular light microscope you'll see in school, which actually is like the glasses. Light goes through the lens, boom, it magnifies it. How the SEM works is it shoots down a steady stream of electrons onto the object, and when the electrons reflect back, the microscope reads the signals and creates an image. Through that, the topography of the object will be in great detail and much more magnified than a regular light microscope. So if a regular light microscope has about a few hundred magnification, the SEM can actually go up to 1.2 million times. So what I had to do was I had to create a bunch of samples and to put under, take pictures, and do a bit of research on why it looks that way. So for example, I made a sample of a sea urchin. To the regular eye, the sea urchin looks smooth. The sea urchin spine looks smooth, just small, smooth, and regular. But however, if you put it under SEM, you can see multitudes of little tiny bumps and spines on the seemingly smooth surface. Now another one is the blue morpho butterfly. This beautiful butterfly looks blue, but in fact, the fun fact is it's actually greenish. So why it looks blue? So if you look closely at the butterfly scale on the wings are made up of tiny little scales. And if you take the cross section of the scale and put it under the microscope, you'll see tiny little microstructures. So how that works is when the light hits the microstructures, unlike regular pigments which reflect certain light back, this actually distorts the wavelengths of the light and actually diffracts it. And when it diffracts, some of the wavelengths are canceled and some are amplified and reflected back, making the green look actually blue. So what the exciting part of me doing this is I was actually able to be in a professional microscopy lab, which was great. I was able to, they told me to put gloves on, make sure to sanitize everything so I don't contaminate everything, which added to like the excitement of I'm going professional. And so I was able to prepare stubs. I was able to put these samples in the oven to dry it, so to make sure that the moisture doesn't mess with the microscope. And then I had to paint it with gold and with the sputter coating machine, which was because since the electrons has to bounce back, it has to be covered in something conductible such as metal, and gold was a great option for that. So then I get the final product. And when I put the final product under the microscope, it's like an alien world that's been revealed to me because it's just different from what I look with my bare eyes. Operating with the SCM was a new experience for me, and I would have never appreciated the microscopic world without me actually operating it. Of course, I can just go online and search for SCM, pick photos and all that, but it's just completely different from making your own and putting it under and taking your own pictures. So just the 5-year-old me would never imagine that I would be in this position of doing science and working with this complicated equipment and contributing to the museum. And I would have never known if I had never applied to volunteer at the Smithsonian, and I'm very glad that I've done. Thank you.
During the summer, I was in the entomology department, which deals with insects. The peculiar thing was that I actually wasn't working with insects. I was working with spiders, which are arachnid. At the end of the project, I started thinking about where I was 10 years ago and how back then there wasn't anyone around, someone who was interested in science, that I could go ask questions to them about something that has to do with science. But now I'm able to do that. And I remember being about 7 years old and being curious about these fuzzy little green caterpillars that were around my house. And I remember bothering them all the time. My mom used to warn me about them and tell me that at some point they're gonna get hurt. And she was right, I did get hurt. When I touched them, there was a burning sensation in my hand. But I was still curious about them and I continued to bother them. But now I think it's sort of amazing that I can go up to someone who works in the department that I work at, and I can ask them questions about these caterpillars that I used to see when I was younger. And also I started thinking about when I was about 5 years old and when I came to the US. And I had so many of the opportunities open to me, but I was sort of a sheltered kid and I wasn't really able to go out much. But now I'm able to go out and actually have something that's sort of like a job and be able to experience so many new things. I also remember when I first heard about the program and thinking that I wasn't going to get in, so I wasn't even going to try to apply. My mom still encouraged me. She told me you should at least put your tip in the hat and try it out. And I did get into the program, which I was really surprised about. And it was amazing having to have this opportunity, but also it was sort of
hard to be able to socialize with so many people and having to interact with the public. It was a bit strange at first, talking to all these new strangers, but at some point I started getting comfortable with it. I started getting comfortable talking with my mentor and interacting with them and doing this actual job with my partner. And I think that's an amazing thing because it does help you grow up and sort of be able to find yourself. At the end of the project, I started thinking also about what I was started learning about me and how, though I did enjoy the project, it was an amazing experience working with spiders. And it was fascinating to just see these creatures. I also thought to myself it was a lot of work working at a desk. And I thought didn't really see myself doing something like this in the future. So I feel like you should always take a chance as well because you're gonna learn things about yourself that you never knew. And I think you should always just try new things because you never know how everything is going to turn out.
Hi, my name is Shalom Enda, and this summer I got an internship at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. I was excited to do it. Working at a museum is a beautiful thing. You get to see behind the scenes of the exhibits and see what the staff does to make these exhibits unique. What I did was categorize spiders in Smithsonian vials. We had some unknown spiders, but we put the known ones in our database. My partner, Genesis, and I sat at a desk, took dead spiders out, put them in new vials, and then searched for the species. We did this for hours at a time. I was a little disappointed to be sitting inside most of the day to monotonously put spiders in vials. I wanted to go outside. But at least there was something interesting that we did, which was how to find the species. We looked up the right body part and see if it compares to the actual spider. But I was looking for something more exciting. Then one day my dream came true, to go outside. We went to see in the butterfly garden how collectors accumulated their spiders using a net. Finally, a breath of fresh air. It was so exhilarating to go outside and finally see live spiders in action. There were so many little critters in that garden. Like on one leaf of a plant, hundreds of ants, maybe even thousands of them, were eating milkweed. At that moment, I was like, wow, I wonder if there are much bigger creatures. Then I saw a bird in a bird's nest caring for its young, and a squirrel scurrying beneath the plants and flowers looking for food. It was incredible to see all this diversity in this garden. It changed my perspective. There are so many things existing in our big world, and it made me thoughtful, and it made me more attentive to the animals in our environment, and made me more careful to not step on them. This experience has reminded me of when I was young. I was a toddler, amazed by animals of all kinds. Their behaviors appealed to me. I grew up watching Animal Planet, and this experience has really reminded me of my childhood spirit. It reinforced my passion for animals. In the end, I became more curious for animals and what they do. The search for spiders has made me more careful of the things that we share our earth with. We humans have done a lot on this world, some good and some bad. And I want to make a good impact by helping endangered animals, not hurting them. And we have a lot to know, and I want to help do that also, since I became more sensitive to the animals in our environment.
7 years ago, in 5th grade, I took my real first science class in school. The only long-term effect of that class was to cement in my mind my impressions of teachers, and especially science teachers. They were boring, they were stiff, and they just didn't care what they were talking about. We've all had that one teacher who could put you to sleep just by talking. They just droned on, and there was no emotion. They just talked in a monotone. Some of us, however, have been fortunate enough to have the opposite kind of teacher, someone who cared what they were teaching about, and so they had emotion, they had life, and their presentations and their teaching was fun and engaging. This summer, as an intern at the National Museum of Natural History, I got to go on a behind-the-scenes tour of the geology collections. The man who led that tour, Dr. Timothy McCoy, was one of the best teachers I've ever heard. He was fun as he talked, he was engaging, and he made the learning interesting. We could have gone to those collections and just walked around and looked at objects by ourselves, but then the real point of us going would have been lost. If we had gone and looked around, I would have seen maybe a rock like this one and thought, oh, it's kind of cool, it's shaped like Texas. Without someone to tell me, I would have had no idea that it's the oldest known rock in existence on Earth, at 4.6 billion years old, and it's from a meteorite from outer space. Or something like this rock. This rock might have caught my eye because this lighter colored stripe right here is different from it, but I've had no idea that it's from the layer of ash that blanketed the Earth after a massive meteorite struck our planet, wiping out the dinosaurs. But if we take a step back and look at Dr. McCoy, he was able to talk to us and make learning interesting and fun because he had that knowledge from a career in that field. Now, in Curious, the department that I've been interning in, our goal is to have interactions like these with visitors. We're specifically designed toward a teen audience to engage them through science, and that starts with our volunteers. All of our volunteers are teens themselves, and so they know how to make learning fun and engaging for people of their own ages, but of all ages. And if we look at Dr. McCoy and our teen volunteers, the big difference is Dr. McCoy's education and his career versus our teens who are still in high school. And so while they have some knowledge, they don't have all of that information that Dr. McCoy has at his fingertips. And that's where my project as an intern came in. I was working on making these things called facilitation guides to communicate that information to these volunteers. Now, a facilitation guide may sound like something complicated, but in reality, it was something almost like a user's manual. But instead of for being like a car, it was for the collections and the activities inside of Curious. Now, there were a few facilitation guides that already existed like this one, but they were long and they were boring and they looked like textbooks. I mean, no one would want to read something like that. Instead, I worked on making guides that were shorter, they were easier to read, they were more fun, and they were engaging. Now, when I first heard what my project was going to be, I envisioned myself sitting at a computer screen in a dark room, typing away, and surrounded by books. But you can only communicate so much through writing, and that's where my project shifted from what I thought it was going to be. Instead of just sitting at a computer screen typing, although I did do some of that, I got to go and talk to other volunteers and interns to Curious and find out what they knew about the exhibit, how they had found out about these collections, and how they wanted to learn more about them. Did they want to read something or did they want to watch a video? Then, using that feedback from them, I was able to take that and directly transfer it to these guides in order to create an optimal facilitation guide. When the summer began, I thought my only real takeaway from this project was going to be my work on these guides and not much else. However, as the summer progressed, I began to see I was gaining so much more. Instead of just working on these guides, I was talking to these volunteers and the staff at the museum, and my eyes were being opened to the vast field of education, which I had known almost nothing about. I had fallen into the same trap that most teens and even adults in our world today have fallen into. Because of our experiences with teachers and in traditional school settings, we believe learning is something to be avoided and something to be dreaded because it's been so boring and it's been so stiff in the past. Instead, as a result of this internship, I believe that learning should be something to be sought out and something to be enjoyed. And I believe that can start with museums. Instead of just being old buildings full of signs and collections, museums should be fun places that people come because they want to learn and they know they'll have fun doing it and it'll be interesting and engaging. Curious was the first exhibit of its kind to ever really be created in a museum, especially such a large and well-known one like the Natural History Museum. But other museums are quickly starting to follow in its footsteps. Curious is specifically designed for a teen audience, and so as other museums start to create exhibits like it, and Curious exists year after year, we are reaching huge amounts of teens. Hopefully this will have a large ripple effect as my generation of teens grow up and have children and teens of their own. The goal is that these memories of museums and their impacts and the joy that learning can be will carry through to them, their children, and to future generations as we all work together to make the world more knowledgeable.